Yes, welcome back to the Flow Morning Show, and it is the week of the elections here in South Australia, and I've got with me an SA Best Upper House candidate. His name is Keyvan Abak, and he's got an amazing story to tell. Keyvan, it's great to have you on the Flow. Welcome. How are you?
Great to be with you, Alice, and your listeners. I'm well, thank you.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. Now, I want to start with your background and talking about the fact that you are an immigrant, a refugee, and you've got a fantastic story to tell there. We probably don't have time to hear all of it, but I just want our listeners and our viewers here to get an understanding of the kinds of challenges that you had when it came to actually getting into Australia. The adversity that you had to grapple with is just tremendous, and you really took a role of leadership in and amongst being virtually imprisoned. And that set you up for being a leader in the community, which is what we've seen you go on to achieve before you then decided to take a stab at the political world, just to add something else to your plate. So why don't you take us back to the beginning? We'll go back to when you came here as a young refugee and just, I guess, divulge what that was all like, because it was just a ridiculously hard experience, and you got through it.
So I'm an Iranian Mandaean refugee, or a small minority followers of John the Baptist in Iran. It's a persecuted minority. When I was born in my community, discrimination and persecution and racism, if you like, was something that I had to become acquainted with and accept, which I found very difficult to do so at a young age, which eventually, I guess, resulted in my exodus, leaving the country. Discrimination had become part of our lives that we had to accept. We had lots of trouble in the education system, where we were called lots of names and at times physically abused. As I grew up, given that my father was a former teacher and had valued education and valued knowledge, it resulted to me leaving the country. I arrived in late 2000, early 2001, and was incarcerated at Woomera Detention Center for almost, if I recall correctly, about 30 months plus. There wasn't much to do in the center. I mean, you wake up and you're incarcerated, and you go to bed, you're incarcerated. So I took it upon myself to teach myself English and to read, write, and speak. And as you mentioned earlier, I took, at a very young age, given that I, after a few months, was able to communicate and read and write, took upon myself a leadership position within the detainees to be a connector and a communicator with those who were experiencing some difficulties and some issues. And I guess that paved the path and the journey that I am on today. Eventually, I was released from Woomera, and I was placed in a community detention center based in the community, where I was allowed to go to school. I did have carers, if you like, 24 hours a day, which restricted my movements. I was only allowed to go to medical appointments or to school only, and everything was monitored and documented.
Just if you can, take me back to that point about you taking it on yourself to learn the English language, because that's fascinating. I want to hear more about that, because this is an extraordinary thing for such a young person to go out of their way to do. Most young kids are only focused on how they can find a toy somewhere to play with. So it's extremely impressive, I guess, on your part to have gone out of your way and said, look, I actually have so much time on my hands to do nothing here every day. Why don't I teach myself a new language?
I befriended a number of nurses and medical staff, or allied health workers, if you like. It's an irony that I'm an allied health worker myself now. And when they asked me what I really wanted, I asked for a dictionary, Persian to English or vice versa, whichever was they were able to find. And they also started to smuggle in storybooks for me, designed for kids, very young kids, very simple to read and understand and follow. And I would sit 4 to 5 hours a day, and I will find the meaning and definitions to really understand the story or the narrative behind this book. And sometimes I spend days trying to understand the narrative in this 5-6 page book. And when I do, I proudly go back and read it and then move on to the next book. And next thing you see, within a few months, investing 4 to 5 hours a day, I was reading books. I was reading 100 pages books and novels and trying to really understand different cultural aspects and way of living outside and beyond the bars and razor wires.
Wow. There's a lot there. We're going to move into talking a bit about your professional side. So you've recently just come back from Mount Gambier, and this is a very sensitive issue that you're going to discuss now with us. But you went up to Mount Gambier. I understand there was a tragedy that occurred there, which is very close to the remit that you have as someone in the community who works as an allied health professional, particularly in the area of mental health. So I'll let you just outline what this trip consisted of. Obviously, a very raw nature and very sensitive issue to it, but summarise what this trip consisted of and why you were in Mount Gambier recently.
I've been lucky enough to be able to travel to regional towns in the past 8 years in particular, provide services in the line of addiction and mental health, homelessness, domestic violence, in particular Riverland, Mount Gambier and Murray Bridge. As part of my campaigning, I traveled to Mount Gambier recently, which, as you may know, has a significant mental health, substance misuse, homelessness, and suicide issues in the community. There was as you mentioned, there was a tragic domestic violence murder on the weekend. And my understanding is that was the third in 18 months, so I was told by locals. And sadly, a 16-year-old teenager also lost her life to suicide a couple of days ago. And I was told by community members that her mom also had taken her life 6 months prior to that, which is tragic and very sad to grasp and comprehend. That such a small community is going through so many adverse issues at the same time. And as part of the narrative that I was told by a number of community members, so what I did was I went for a walk and I was greeting people and just asking them about their concerns and the gaps in the community. And I had introduced myself and what I was doing there to actually really listen. Also as an allied health worker who visits from time to time. And people felt that they weren't listened to in the regional towns, that they were neglected, that and some of them said, frankly, they had enough, that they really need people to listen to some of their issues that they're experiencing in the community and invest or reinvest in the community and come up with community-based services delivered by local people, for local people, and perhaps invest in those communities, be it detox beds in Mount Gambier Hospital, one of which that the community has been asking for years, given that the community is going through drug and alcohol and all forms of addiction. They're not equipped. They don't have adequate funding to provide such services for the community. And so people have to travel up to 5 hours to Adelaide to seek those supports. And we all know it's difficult. I had a farmer who reached out, who had a son battling addiction. And he was explaining to me how difficult it was for to see their son to go through addiction of methamphetamine, how destructive their life had become. and sadly eventually took his life, and how powerless the family felt reaching out to a number of services trying to mitigate their way through the system and get some assistance, get some help, only to face rejection after rejection after rejection. And sadly, these narratives and stories are too common, and they're not restrictive to the Limestone Coast area, Riverland and other country regions will say that the same thing is happening in their regions.
If you've been impacted by anything said there, please reach out to Lifeline. Thank you so much for sharing all that. There's a lot of heavy things to unpack there. We'll move along in the interview. So mental health, you've sort of summed it up and that trip in particular, but I want you just to touch on, if you can, the other work you've done in the timeline of your professional career, which involves serving the regional communities, because I understand that you were based in the north of South Australia for some years. You now have an office in the city in Perry Street. But talk to me about all the mental health work that you've done within regional communities, because we know, as you kind of touched on there with your prior sentiments, that there's a real lack of facilities and resources in the Australian regions when it comes to what we are experiencing right now, which is a mental health crisis, not helped by the pandemic, obviously. So tell us about all the history of the work that you've done in communities concerning mental health.
Prior to COVID-19, I had volunteered some of my time down north at one of the medical centers, doing some pro bono work with the community, in particular around addiction, gambling, drug and alcohol. And as you mentioned, my clinic is based in Perry Street in Adelaide. But I've also been lucky to have the flexibility and freedom to travel to regions, Berry, Renmark, Riverland, Mangambia, Murray Bridge, and extend my services and my skills in other regions, some of which have been particular in upskilling other professionals in those regions. So the work is continued by locals, for locals. And so that's one of the strategic planning that I had in my mind. So if you empower local people and you upskill local people, they'll be able to provide services around the clock for those people who need it in the community. Just about my previous point, Alice, about the lack of detox facility in Mangambia, the story is the same for Murray Bridge and Riverland, that they don't actually have access to any detox facilities in those regions. And you have to go through a lot of challenges and barriers to make it happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's a massive issue. We often touch on it here on the air at Flow FM, and just in general, the lack of medical facilities that are available for Australians that are based in the country is a massive injustice and continues to not be acknowledged and addressed in the way that it should be by our politicians. So I guess that's a good segue into the political phase of your professional timeline, which we now see you running as a candidate for the SA Best Party in the Upper House. So tell us why you are running, Doctor.
Alice, the truth is I'm not a career politician. I'm an allied health worker, and one of the reasons that I did get involved in running was I'm just a regular person. I could keep saying I'm an allied health worker. I'm a health practitioner. And I've been told by so many people, including this morning, it's a good thing that we need more regular people. We need more diverse people, especially in profession and to this line of work. I believe we need diversity, representing different issues that we are experiencing in our communities. I bring lived experience, Alice. I bring life experience, but I also bring my professional expertise in the areas of mental health and addiction, domestic violence, homelessness, issues that our communities are impacted severely and significantly, especially in the regions.
Do you feel that those issues are adequately represented right now within our branch of politicians in South Australia and Australia in general?
When you are at the grassroots level, this is what I do. I practice every day. I see these issues at the cold face of my practice. And this is not the narrative that I get told as a doctor, as an allied health worker, as a counselor, as a practitioner. People feel frustrated, let down, neglected. And I guess going back to your original question, why I got involved, I'm hoping that by my involvement and I can shine a light on these significant issues, in particular in regions, and bring about change in the right way. And what I ask people is that with the election looming around the corner, is to really start asking some questions. Are we channeling these fundings in the right place? Are we investing our money where it's needed? Have we been heard? And so with the election looming, I do ask people to think carefully about who they choose to represent their issues, their communities, and their concerns, and vote with their feet.
Well said. Speaking to Dr. Keyvan Abak, who is running in the SA Best Upper House. We're on the home stretch here, Doctor, so I want to finish by asking you about some things we've seen come out in the media recently. It regards the policy regarding the Barossa train, which there's a big push to have a wine train in the Barossa up and running eventually in the state of South Australia. So I believe that you want to clarify what's been said in the media by some of the other representatives from your party.
Thank you, Ellis. Yes, that's correct. So let me be very clear that, and I will answer your question in two parts, if I may. I want to be clear that we support a proposal by Chateau Tonanda owner John Gaber to reopen the rail line to the world-famous Barossa Valley for a tourist wine train. We also will seek an independent review to extend the Barossa line all the way to Nuri, not only to provide tourist train services, but also to provide passenger rail services during morning and afternoon peak periods with a transfer at Gola railway station, as well as provide an alternative and comfortable journey to the city for commuters. So that's the other thing I wanted to clarify is, as a way of background, which ties my previous points together, the government announced the next stage of the North-South Corridor, which basically is a 10K stretch tunnels from River Torrens to Darlington. It's about 10K, which is going to cost roughly about $10 billion, from what I understand, at this stage. And most of it is tunnel. So Luigi Rossi, who is the former senior transport department veteran of 35 years, who also oversaw the Hazen tunnels, the Northern Expressway and the South Road Superway at Regency Park, has come up with another option, which has a smaller tunnel and has a superhighway, like a suspended road, if you like, and similar to South Road Regency Park, which is elevated. So he's proposing that if we do 6K tunnel and 4K elevated, his project will save $1 billion. It will cut the project by 12 months, so it will reduce the inconvenience to commuters and residents by 12 months and requires less compulsory acquisition of houses on South Road. The government basically has come back and said not interested. So what we're saying, if we get the balance of power in the Legislative Council, we will seek an independent review of this project. And if the costings stack up, we will see through it that the option will be pursued. And the $1 billion in saving we are advocating for it to go and rescue our broken mental health and health system. And as Frank Pangalo, my colleague, said, that if the identical economic benefits to the state can be achieved at a significant reduced overall cost to taxpayers, then it should be endorsed, and it's a no-brainer.
There we go. And just to finish on, I'm going to ask you in 4 years' time, what are things going to look like for you, and where will you strive to be?
I will continue to be the allied health worker that I am. I continue to campaign and be an advocate for the community at the grassroots level. And I continue to visit the regions as I do right now, regardless of the outcome of the election, and be a champion for the issues that our community face day in and day out. And I just wanted to say that we're here to put you first and keep the government accountable. And this is something that I've taken on personally. And I try to shine a light on the majority of the issues that I've heard at the grassroots level, not just through my practice, but also through my meetings, especially in the past 4 weeks with the community.
Well, I think there's a big appetite to see more accountability be taken by those who represent us at government level. Dr. Keyvan Abak, it has been so good to have you provide your story here in our Flow FM studios. There's a big election coming up this weekend in the state of South Australia. We wish you and your party all the best for that. And thank you so much for joining us here at Flow FM.
My pleasure, Ellis. Thank you for having me.